Good afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Solvita ZARINA, and I am the moderator for the panel Living Technologies, Artificial Intelligence and Biopolitics. And we are about to begin. This is 4 p.m. And I think in order to have more time for questions and discussion, and I see all participants are already here, let's begin. First, I would like to remind some organizational things. Each panelist has 20-minute time for the presentation, including 1 to 2 questions. And please feel free to ask questions in the chat. Presenters will be happy to answer them after their presentations or in the chat. And please mute your microphone, but I see all already has been muted except myself. Therefore, I think I now can introduce our first speaker, Byron Rich. And Byron is an artist, professor, and lecturer. His work exploring speculative design, biology futures, and tactical media, and this work has been widely exhibited. He was a recipient of an honorary mention at the 2017 Prix Ars Electronica, and he now is a director of academic innovation partnerships and associate professor at the Allegheny College in Meadville, Pennsylvania, United States. And Byron's co-authors are also from Allegheny College. And Byron, the floor now is yours.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Hi, everybody. Nice to be here. I'm going to share my screen and just roll right into this. First, I'll actually briefly introduce, this is Kylie Rhymes, my research assistant. I'll probably do most of the talking today, but Kylie will chime in when she feels appropriate. And with that, we will get going here. Let me optimize the video. There we go. Can everybody see that?
Yes, perfectly.
Yes. Okay, perfect. Great. So our project is called the Suburbs of Accra. Thank you also, I should say, for that very generous introduction. It's very kind of you. As mentioned, yeah, I'm an art professor. Kylie is one of my research assistants. The other one, Kaylani, was unable to make it this morning, but we really appreciate the chance to get to speak to you all today. So our project, the Suburbs of Accra, is kind of an exploration of e-waste and neo-colonialism. So neo-colonialism through the lens of electronic waste and planned obsolescence. I'm going to give a little bit of a background on this project. This first slide is just kind of one of the horrific scenes of environmental destruction in Accra, and we'll get deeper into what this all means in a minute. Let me see, it does not want to. There we go. So a bit of a backstory. This is where I'm from, is Alberta. This is what kind of everybody thinks about Alberta as being this like pristine landscape in Western Canada. However, the reality is much more like this. This is the city I grew up in, Calgary, and it's just kind of like endless urban sprawl as it like heads towards the mountains. So Calgary is about 75 kilometers from the foot of the mountains that we just saw and just sprawls endlessly into the distance. The reason that I show you this as a little bit of a background is that it kind of like underpins a lot of the problems that this project like intends to explore, that being like planned obsolescence, shoddy construction for the sake of just quickly replacing, and poor environmental planning and poor lack of policy, public policy to kind of mitigate some of the environmental catastrophes that this sort of development spawns. So this is actually the neighborhood that I largely grew up in. And in this neighborhood on the west side of Calgary, this is kind of what everybody looked like in the early 2000s when I was a teenager. So it was just a lot of happy-looking white people using their computers, not thinking about the ramifications of the kind of like horrible expansionist and like colonial legacy policies that led to this kind of like development. So with that, in 2007, I started to see these images of these like vast kind of like dump sites in emerging economies, largely in Southeast Asia and in Africa. And at that point, I had started to think about like, oh, what kind of work could I do that actually like represents how horrible and how this is just this like very sad legacy of colonialism still happening like in that current moment. However, the technology was not sufficient that I could produce something that could kind of be like visualized worldwide without actually going to these sites and erecting some kind of edifice, which actually was just playing into that like neo-colonial paradigm further, being that I'm from a Western nation that has a horrific history of colonization. So it really didn't feel all that appropriate to be working on. But then fast forward to today, to last year, I was actually speaking with Kylie and Kylie, and we were looking at these images of this e-waste site, and we got to talking about this project that I envisioned way back in 2007 called the Suburbs of Accra. And so we started to look at this particular site in Accra. I'll show you the location. So here are just some images. There's a lot of like children and families growing in this, or living and working in this e-waste site, and I'll get into its details in a little bit here. So Accra, for those that don't know, is a country on the southwest coast of Africa, kind of up here on the Horn. We'll zoom in on it. Or Accra is a city in Ghana. Sorry, Ghana is the country. There's Ghana. We'll keep zooming in. There's Accra. And then this is Agbog Bloshi, which is this giant e-waste dump site that is in Accra. It's kind of an interesting place in that every year it's purported that there's 150,000 tons of e-waste, largely coming from Europe, but mostly from North America, from Canada and the east coast of the United States. 150,000 tons is what they say is delivered there. The real number is more in the multiple millions of tons. Every year annually, there's 50 million tons. That's metric tons of e-waste overall in the world. And so a good portion of it, 10%, between 5 and 10% of it ends up at this single e-waste site in Accra. At this site, there's 10,000 workers. Usually, a majority of them are young women and children working in this e-waste site, kind of like doing what you would call, or what's called now colloquially, urban mining, which is kind of a dangerous phrase, actually. So there's a lot of like ramifications to this type of site in that there's no regulation around any of the work that is done in this e-waste site. There's no governmental policy around like environmental protection, much less like human protection. So there's all sorts of like diseases that are rampant, respiratory diseases. People's like wounds don't heal. And then there's the tertiary effects of like groundwater contamination that kind of manifests in things like really like high amounts of particular like dioxins within like eggs and stuff like that. So there's a lot of like endocrine disruptors that actually like leach into these water systems, which is another thing that if you've ever seen any of my other work, I'm really interested in. I've got way too many tabs open there. So what we started to do on this project as we were thinking about it is what we're really interested in is collecting kind of like antiquated technologies, anything with like a hard drive. And we kind of like collect this stuff. And what we want to do is, or what we're trying to do is gathering data off of it. So much of this like e-waste, items like this old Mac, this old Dell laptop, this other MacBook, most of them are not wiped for their data before they head into these like e-waste sites. So largely this stuff just heads there with photographs, banking information, location information, all sorts of stuff on the individuals who owned the machines when they were in North America or in parts of Europe. But largely we're really focused on the North American, the issue within North America in that urban sprawl and this whole idea of suburbanization is really prevalent in our cities in North America, especially like in our area around Toronto. New York City obviously has a ton of urban sprawl. And then some of the newer cities like Houston and Dallas are just like prolific areas. So anyway, we collect all these like antiquated machines. You can see these old books, and we start to look for data off of them. Here's Kylie working on like color stories, working on like artifact like creation. And then this is Kylie also working on creating like artifacts for the exhibition. So here's an example of like one of the artifacts that we're collecting. We're using a lot of this like recycled plastic that actually comes from electronics recycling. And then it was Kylie's wonderful idea to create objects, these little like manifestations for holding like USB sticks and hard drives on top of them that are outmoded and antiquated like data storage devices from the past. So you can see these are like slides, old cassettes, and these are just little pedestals to actually hold some of the other artifacts that we're gathering the data from. So what we're ultimately doing with all this data that we gather is we're creating augmented reality assets that can actually be like geolocated in places like Agbogbloshie within Ghana. The goal is that people then could go to these locations, or the folks there could go to these locations, hold up their phone, and all of a sudden they would be presented with something that looks like this, an augmented reality object that kind of gives like a snapshot of who owned the device that was found in this location or destined for this location, and it'll pop up on their device or in their, you know, whatever, their computer or their cell phone, and it'll tell you about the individuals who own the device that's ended up in this e-waste site. The whole goal is to kind of show the trajectory of these objects, and these objects that have like planned obsolescence baked into their development, and to kind of show the like ramifications of our obsession with newness and always like replacing our devices after just a couple of years. So here's like an example: the Johnson family from Raleigh, North Carolina. This stuff was actually taken off an IBM DeskStar 180. The photos and stuff are from approximately 2003, and this would just be an example of like the objects that we would be creating. So we really want to show like how fundamentally it comes down to like relatively upper middle class and rich white people living in North America, playing a part of this like colonial paradigm that extends to this day, and how it's now reached into this like neo-colonial kind of like moment where now it's our waste and our digital like selves actually colonizing these regions that have already have this horrific legacy of colonization. So here's another one: Myers family, St. Paul, Minnesota, from about 2001, and their house kind of like sitting on top of the site where this device was either found or destined to come from, if that makes sense. So what we're working on right now is a gallery installation. Kylie got pretty far on the actual creation of the augmented reality objects, and now we're developing this for a show that's happening in Los Angeles in late 2013 or early 2014, or not 2013, 2023. Oh my gosh, I can't believe it's that year already. Where we'll have some of these like little objects actually displayed with the actual drives that we extracted the data from, and then like a virtual fly-through of the e-waste site in Accra, and then examples of the actual assets, that augmented reality assets that have been created and geolocated in Accra. Pretty good synopsis so far, Kylie? Yeah. So Kylie and Kaylani have been amazing in creating all these like various assets and digging through like old stuff and finding old machines. They spent a ton of time going to recycling facilities around here and collecting objects and what have you. I think I'm going to cut it relatively short because I want to leave lots of room for people to either go long or to ask questions or whatever it is. If you have more questions about the projects, feel free to email Kylie or myself. Kylie is rhymesc@allegheny.edu. I'm brich@allegheny.edu. My website is byronrich.com. You can see the project on my website, and Instagram, where we'll start to post more about the project, is byron_in_space.png on Instagram. And with that, thank you all very much for coming to listen to us ramble about all this wild stuff. And thank you to the organizers for having us. Really appreciate it. And with that, I will stop screen sharing.
Thank you, Byron, very much. I hope we will have questions because of impressive presentation, very well staged. My personal question is about design emotional durability. How you see this aspect of design in this context? Every year I have to have new iPhone and so on.
Yeah, that's, you know, in the States right now, I was born in Canada, but it's the same thing. Like, people think of Canada as being so separate from the US, but a lot of the policies are super similar, where there's all this like resistance and fight against the right to repair, as it's called over here. So like car companies, electronics manufacturers are all like really fighting consumers and trying to like push back against a consumer's ability to repair or update their technological artifacts. And one of the big like kind of methods by which they do this is black boxing their technology, not laying bare at all the ways in which it works, the ways in which they're developed, and like all the technologies that are like within them. They purposefully like obfuscate the complexity of them, so we feel not disempowered to actually like ever like just kind of rebuild them, which is super unfortunate. And you know, this is really manifest. The reason we're trying to make this connection between this like suburbanization and these objects is it's the exact same with like home development over here. There's this big push for like cheaper, lower quality housing that's like much bigger and much flashier and replacing like wetlands and farmlands. And so there's this like huge crossover between like housing manufacturing and device manufacturing, and the ways in which it ultimately disenfranchises and further marginalizes emerging economies and the folks working within those emerging economies. It's not just about like the waste itself, it's about the lack of environmental regulation around it and how that trickles down into like severely impacting the lives, especially of women and children in these emerging economies. So yeah, it's a dark rabbit hole to go down, but one that's both sad but incredibly fascinating.
Thank you very much. And I was really impressed by your specific idea connected with our conference topic, because of course we all know this with this place easier to call Accra rather than this long bog and yeah, nice. We all, maybe not all, know Peter Hugo, who did this photography cycle permanent error, and it happened in 2009. Nothing changed. Periodically BBC and other companies visit this site, and we can see these films, etc., etc. Of course nothing changes. Yeah. And your aspect I saw as a maybe dangerous for artists, don't know, but very conceptually different from all these picturesque photographies, etc., etc. Thank you very much. And we have one question. Could you talk about how you are thinking about the privacy concerns with using data from the devices? Yeah, clearly you all thought a lot about it, so I would love to hear more. And Case Blair asking you.
Sure. Hi, Kath. Nice to see you here. Kath and I work pretty closely on stuff, even though we're on opposite sides of the continent. So it's nice to see Kath participating in this. Yeah, the privacy concerns are a very real one. Like on those examples that we showed you, we're still like grappling with what it means, especially within an institutional context, because we're both university researchers. And so we have to deal with something called the IRB over here. And there's a lot of like ethical implications of actually using private data like that. As artists, we can get away with a certain amount of it under like the guise of appropriation, but it's still like really challenging to get like funding and to get all that stuff when you're using like private data and publicly putting it out there. However, it becomes like pretty murky because these individuals have not properly gotten rid of their own data on these things, and they no longer own the object. So there's this like real massive gray area on what you can actually do with the data, what you can release, and it's really dependent on context. So it's actually easier for us to bring like private data and show it in European galleries where we're even more one step removed than it is to do it in the United States or Canadian like context. And then it's even more complicated. So we've got, the sun is shining directly into our windows right now. So Kylie's got this like angelic halo happening here, which is fun. But it's even more difficult in a university context because there are accreditation issues that you run into when you start using like private data, and the university gets really mad at us when we're like releasing private data or dealing with this stuff. So yeah, we're really grappling with what we can and cannot show in the exhibition that's going to be in Los Angeles in like a year and a half from now. And we got a lot to think about. I wish I could give a more full answer about how we like fully investigate that, but yeah, I don't know what we're gonna do. I'm okay with getting in a little bit of trouble, but I worry more about Kylie and Kaylani. They're like earlier career scholars, so we don't want to risk their careers quite as much. So we'll tangle with that when we get there. And then regarding Solvita, your other comment there about, there are a lot of people that do like photography around these regions. And I even find our perspective on it, Kylie, Kaylani, and I's, somewhat troubling in that, are we playing a role in furthering this like neo-colonial kind of like narrative by doing this work? Or is creating these AR assets and not actually traveling to these regions, not playing as into like the disaster tourism kind of like phenomena that is occurring? And I think that's something that we've really got to carefully navigate, in so much as like we could very easily veer off course into being part of the problem. And so it's a complicated relationship, and we're walking a very fine line, that's for sure. And I think part of being like good scholars and good artists is playing with that fine line and acknowledging it. And when we do step over the line, taking those criticisms to heart and like acting on them. So that's why it's nice to be part of conferences like this, where we can like hear feedback and hear pushback. So yeah, I appreciate those questions and comments.
Thank you so much for your fascinating talk. And now I would like to introduce Maija Demitere. Maija is an artist, researcher, and doctoral student at Liepāja University, Latvia. Her main fields of research are deep sustainability, slow media art, developing art research and presentation methods that could offer different lifestyles, promoting individual self-sustainability. And I know Maija from the previous conference as a very skilled speaker on very kind of a not so fascinating topic. I'm all ears, Maija. The floor now is yours.
Thank you for this introduction. And today I am going to be speaking about my main concern for many years now. And I really liked the previous presentation. It's fascinating. And it's also kind of concluded on this note that there are so many artists, so many people trying to raise awareness, and absolutely nothing is changing. And I'm following another artist, Danny Bloger, who's doing exactly the same thing. Well, not exactly the same thing, but he's exploring and collecting old computers in garbage dumps, I think in Kenya, and trying to use the data, discover the data. And I think he said something about trying to send the garbage back to the owners of those computers. I really like that approach. And my main concern is slow media art and deep sustainability. Slow media art comes from the slowness part comes from slow movements that started as slow food, so as a reaction to McDonald's. And deep sustainability comes from deep ecology. So I'm borrowing these words, these names, these titles that essentially are created to mean slow as good, deep as opposed to shallow. Because shallow bad, deep good. So fast is bad, slow is good. And I am a bit obsessed in my research with how to influence the normal person. So how to speak with a person on a street in a way that they would listen. So what are the instruments that we as artists or we as researchers could develop and could use to actually reach this person on the street? So because we all have seen documentary movies, we all have seen photo shoots and photo sessions and in so many different ways. And starving children and celebrities with starving children and dying children, and that makes absolutely no change. And for me, that's the main question. What can we do to actually make some kind of change? And I've been doing my doctoral research now, I think, for 5 years. I am still searching for my answer, and I have not reached any type of valid conclusion with this. And I started doing interviews with other artists who are exploring sustainability in different kinds of ways. And when we are meeting each other on Zoom, of course, and then we are talking to each other and kind of just patting each other on the shoulder, doing so great. What we're doing is so important. This work that we are into, this field is so important. We have to finally change the views of people. And I always ask them, but have you seen any long-term change in the subjects that you're working with? And all of them have said no. There is no long-term influence on people. So when we talk about mindfulness or biodiversity, or being aware of your environment, and being aware of your local environment, so taking a nature walk with a guide that will teach you about edible plants in your neighborhood. So people go onto the walk, they go home, and they will not go outside to pick leaves on the side of the road to make salad. So this type of long-term effect, how to reach this long-term effect? If someone can tell me, you as a person, please, I'm asking you, how can I make you recycle? I have kind of concluded at some point, and most of them are not easy to hear, and most of them also come from Germans and the Dutch people. We have to start give fines to people. So every person who puts unrecycled garbage in a general bin gets a fine next month in their post. And so that's we would be dealing with recycling. And then we can see the other side of this. We can see Germans who are recycling so much that they are starting to burn the recycled garbage because they don't have enough burnables now. And also we can see the statistics from, I think this was America, that say that even if you do recycle, it's very little, very small part of this your sorted garbage actually gets recycled. Most of it will be just not recycled at all because of reasons. For example, China doesn't take in recycled garbage anymore. And then most of the garbage will be downcycled. So it's not going to be reused in a way that it can be recycled after that. It's going to be downcycled. And so eventually it just becomes, well, unrecyclable. So even if we do get people to recycle, we also have to deal with well, basically the industry, because when we talk about this, that we as a people have to recycle, then when we do recycle, then the country doesn't do anything with our recyclables. So it's a huge loop that all revolves around money. And for me, that is kind of understandable. We all live in this world and we all kind of want to eat. Most of us want to eat every day. And so the companies that are producing products, we can't really blame the industry. We can't blame people. We can't blame policy. So who can we blame? Like who do we talk to kind of solve this recycling loop that we are in. And even if you as a person, you go into a store, you are choosing products that you want to buy. Most people will choose a product for their price. It's sad, but it's true, and there's nothing we can do. We can't yell at a young mother of 3 children that you have to buy something that is in a recyclable packaging that is 3 times as expensive. It's just it's not reasonable. So in my research, I'm trying to search for ways how to talk to this young mother in a supermarket who is trying to feed her children, trying to survive in this world that we live in now. And I can teach people how to make a hydroponics or aquaponics system on their windowsill and to grow herbs and strawberries. I can try to convince them to recycle, but the system that we live in now, I am gonna call it the system. We are trapped in this kind of loop where we are dependent on each other, people, the industry, the policy makers, and also just the people who are collecting and recycling our garbage. And what could we do? And the simple things that we can do is just stop buying so much stuff. That is the first thing to do. Stop buying new iPhones. It's sometimes we have to buy those new phones, but just don't buy a new phone just because you want to. The evil of this year is fashion. It's okay. We have trends of what are we fighting against now as activists, and fashion has been the new evil for a couple of years now. But this year, is in particular, we have to stop buying clothing. And as people in Latvia, we are also we are welcome to recycle. But in this country, we are not really offered that many recycling opportunities. We don't have bins. We don't have anyone to collect our garbage. So as a person in Latvia, just try to choose wisely when you are in the store. And so choosing a local product, don't stop eating avocados. That's another big one. And I was kind of hoping to see some webcams turned on, speaking alone in my room about recycling. That's always fun, of course, but it is quite discouraging. Hello, Krista. Thank you. Oh, another one. Hello. And I wanted to talk to you as people and invite you to not eat meat, not buy plastic, try to recycle. And when you come up with a scenario, how can I convince you to change your habits that are so convenient? Please write them in the chat. I am getting desperate. I have to sign in my doctoral research in a couple of months as the absolute deadline, and I need advice from you people. So I'm really asking you, sit for a minute, think about what could convince you to actually start recycling, and write it in the chat. Thank you. That's it from my speech. A bit moralizing, I know, but what can we do?
Thank you, Maya. And rather than being only a moderator, I will be your opponent. You are overly impatient. I see this world in overly optimistic notes living in Latvia. You never can imagine Soviet times and recycling then. You are right. Now we have a lot more to recycle. With Soviet habits, we will be like surrounded by garbage already. But in terms of recycling, in terms of healthy lifestyle, and those are all good things you mentioned, the progress is enormous. You are just impatient young researcher. You have to interview older generation and old generation and these, then you will collect data so optimistic for your dissertations that society already has been changed thanks to your generation. But I'm speaking specifically about Latvia, of course, not diving into world problems, but in Latvia, this progress was enormous. So you are just impatient. Yeah, but maybe someone can comment in a more serious note or help to young doctoral student who has to meet her deadline.
I have a very nice kind of views on this, people who have been raised in Soviet Union. When I have interviewed these people, but not in a kind of in a very serious methodological way, but I have just talked to people in exhibitions, and I have heard stories from multiple people from different degrees of life, where they are saying that the government has been lying them so much that they just don't believe in the government anymore. So when you talk about recycling, they don't see the value in recycling, and they don't believe that recycling is actually a thing. So for me, that's very, very kind of alarming that we live in this a country that doesn't believe that recycling is important. And recycling, that's the first step. That's the easiest thing to do. Like I understand people who are choosing to buy cheaper products because they just want to eat and feed their children. But after buying them, recycling is the easiest thing to do. And when I meet people who are seeing my artworks and just say, "Oh, that's cute," but I just don't believe that this exists. Recycling is not an option. Yeah, maybe I am just impatient, but I think when we are seeing the statistics of how garbage is almost doubling every year, and we are not recycling because of multiple reasons, it is alarming. And I think when we do speak about recycling, we have to, I don't know what. We have to start giving fines to people. That's the only thing I can think of.
Thank you, Maya, for your opinion. You can read Krista's comment or advice, but I have to move forward. And now I would like to introduce you to our next speaker, Riyad Salome. And Riyad Salome is a researcher and art practitioner with a background in graphic design, art mediation, and media art cultures. His work often follows a practical method that uses micro-transformations to respond to the urgency of collective socio-economic change. He is currently a digital design resident at Fikra Design in Sharjah. Riyad, the floor now is yours.
Thank you so much for your introduction. I'm gonna share my screen. Oh. You can see it, right?
Yes, perfectly. Maybe full screen with PDF would be better if you can.
I did put it as full screen.
But if not, it's good enough.
Okay. So my topic is about the biopolitics of post-biological bodies on the web. And from my research, I ended up doing web performance about my relationship with the surveillance capitalism. So it was important for me to respond to my research question, which was about, how does the internet infrastructure transform the nature of bodies in relation to biopower? Throughout my literature and research and autoethnographic method, I ended up with three hypotheses. The first one was that pre-existing power structures are closely related to the extraction of bodies. The second one is that algorithms often erase certain sets of identities that are non-binary. And the third one is that performing on the web means that bodies are often in conflict with surveillance capitalism. I will be developing those thoughts further throughout my presentation, but firstly, it's important to have a bit of a definition of what I mean by the post-biological body. So the post-biological is basically the entanglement of the body with technology, politics, society, history, economy, and many other aspects. So Hans Moravec was the first one who coined that term, but he has written about it more in a way that is positive, and he considered that eventually the body will turn into a machine that will transcend our human biology and intelligence. However, Patricia Clow and Lisa Blackman do not share that belief, and they see the body more of this dynamic, complex system where the boundaries between, this is quoting Lisa Blackman, the self and other inside and the outside, living and non-living, and material and immaterial are permeable. While Patricia Klaus states that the body starts making meaning through transformation and processes. Its milieu cannot be simplified solely to its existence within the tangible physical world, but through its endless mediation between its biological existence and technological one. And believing that technology exists outside of the body, or the body exists outside of technology, is a bit of a naive approach to understanding the complexity of the body. So this is why I had to move more towards critical phenomenology. So like the traditional sense of phenomenology is really understanding everyday experiences through the everyday and the phenomenons that we are experiencing it. But with critical phenomenology, we are looking more into feminist, critical race, disability, queer, and trans thinking, because bodies are different and they're very we do come from so many different backgrounds, culturally, geographically, and really limiting to the body and to one conception and to a one lived experience is not so critical, I think. Gail Lewis and V. Murphy, Gail Salomon ended up writing a book of essays where they invited many scholars to discuss the topic of critical phenomenology. And they stated that there was a necessity to move from the traditional phenomenology into critical phenomenology, as to concede that not all bodies share the same experience in their knowledge, in their violence, and even the way of existence. And part of a quote by Henry Davis, which was part of the essays in the book, he states that in order to achieve a critical phenomenology phenomenology must be seen as a philosophy of differences rather than identity. Or to put it in another way, when our personal identity is disclosed to be intersectional, we can come to disclose our socio-political identities as the difference of differences. So this intersectionality, I think, was extremely important and really studying the relationship and this transformation that has been happening throughout centuries. So, which results into going back to my first hypothesis that these existing power structures relate to the extraction of bodies that has always been politicized. And Michel Foucault has talked a lot about it when he was discussing the notion of biopower. So throughout like the 17th and 18th century, throughout the Industrial Revolution, there was a lot of effort to like domesticate the body and to make it more docile in order to really give in to the industrial complex and to really provide an ecosystem of the society that was being built at the time. And not much has changed. There was this transformation happening throughout currently the immateriality of labor that we are seeing with the internet throughout the digital revolution. And Shoshana Zuboff talked a lot about this, especially in her book, Surveillance Capitalism. So she states how the development of technology, whose main purpose was to give convenience and safety, came at the cost of privacy, predictive and behavioral change to grow an existent capitalistic system. But for me also it was important not to separate the materiality and the materiality of the sense of the biopower that we have been experiencing, of this lived experience, but really to combine both of them. And Teng Hu Hu, in his book, The History of the Cloud, he discusses a lot of the infrastructure that it takes to build the internet. And what does that actually mean? Because the cloud infrastructure, it requires still a form of labor. And we need people from mostly the global south to actually go and do their physical labor to build the cables, to install the fiber optics, and usually they are not paid so well. And on another term, and the materiality, there are like crowd source worker or ghost worker and shadow workers who are behind the scenes of this technology. And they are really like providing its development in a way that mostly we do not really acknowledge or pay much attention to. And often the algorithm that are being built through this extraction, it is really built throughout it, and it works throughout a binary opposition, and everything that is beyond this binary and the categorization that it can, like the machine can really acknowledge, is erasing sets of identities. So the biopower that is presented on the web does not simply start politicizing the body, but it also politicizes the machine, because it's learning from the way that we are perceiving the world. And Defox Harold, he states how artificial intelligence was founded based on the idea that human cognition could be modeled using a computer. And I will discuss more of his theories and his thoughts, where he discusses a lot about like phantasmal media. But before going into that, I want to also note how Safiya Noble was researching a lot about different search engine and how especially bodies of Black women were being presented on the web, and there was a lot of pornification and oppressive systems being exposed throughout how especially Google's algorithm was being built. As from a personal point of view, I tried to experiment of Googling my own countries through different search engines. So the first one was Google, the second was DuckDuckGo, and the third was Bing. So Google's search engine and the result has relatively shown Lebanon as a very torn out country, being afflicted by war, violence, and the imagery that happens are really being produced through one event that happened on August 4, and before that event, 2020, and before that event, it was seeing footages of like the Civil War or the 2006 war. So also it was feeding this narrative of Arab countries being a torn out country that is filled with violences. While when we look at the photos that the search engine of DuckDuckGo and Bing produces, they are relatively more less filled with biases, and they just show relatively the landscape or the flag and different landmarks that are presented in the same country. So we see that there are decisions being made over how these biases are being exposed, and Google being the most popular search engine, there is still a lot of power being held and a lot of decisions that are being made to really feed a certain narrative. And DFox Herald discusses this when it comes to how we can really escape this opposition that is being produced and the way the machines are being built. And he discusses it through phantasmal media and critical computation. So he defines phantasmal media as types of computing systems that prompt narratives and poetic thinking to better understand phenomenon in the world. And he was really able to develop this project by creating something called the AIR project, which is the Advanced Identity Representation, in which he really focused on identity and how this identity is being presented. And in order to escape the oppressive systems that the machine is being built upon, he tried and through social media, gaming platforms, virtual reality projects to implement identity models that are dynamically changed, but based on user action and social context, implement models of identity categorization based on user action and imagination, function across diverse applications, as I said, in game, social networks, and virtual worlds. Ground identity models and result of cognitive science, which result in social categorization, to empower users to construct customized identity models, communities, and experiences, and to avoid verifying social stigmas, biases, and prejudices in computation and infrastructure. So I think his research and projects were really important to showcase that we actually can build systems who are not oppressive and that do not work within the binaries. And in order to reach my third hypothesis, which was how performing on the web means often that bodies are in conflict with surveillance capitalism, I research how like the UX design of cookies is being built and how there is this performative consent wise of those websites, but however they are really being hidden. So by accepting all of the cookies, it took me only 12 seconds to reach a website, but by denying and really opposing the systems of the cookies, it took me around 3 minutes and 8 seconds to actually achieve that. So also it was the systems that are like offering a way to really hide yourself and protect your data are designed in a way not to be accessible, which I know I don't have much time, so I will just make it very brief. So also the same was being done on reCAPTCHA, where we by actually choosing I am not a robot, or like specifying what an orange is, we are really giving free labor to Google's algorithm to train its model to become even better. And when we look more into Google's legal policies, they actually are not so, excuse me. about that. They
Yeah.
are actually
Excuse me, Riyadh. You have shown only the first slide. Is it your intention?
No, actually, I was going into the other slides, but is it changing now?
Frozen the first, no, it might be, but I see there are 17 of them. Maybe you can quickly show. We have still 5 minutes more.
Yeah.
Please don't panic. But
I was changing the slides, but I guess there was some kind of issue.
You can restart, yeah. And
is it changing now?
It is changing now perfectly.
Okay, so I'm
nice presentation view.
Yeah, so I'm just gonna show you the one of the Google, DuckDuckGo, and Bing, that the photos, so it will make more sense. And this is the capture. So I'm not gonna go back from before because we don't have much time. But basically, as I was saying, in Google's legal policies, once someone actually refuses to give out their information, Google still manages to replicate the data that is called as an anonymous data. And it is being used to generate global trends for them, and it is still being, there's still a monitoring happening. It's just not being done under your name. So also there is a lot of conflict when it comes to that. So that led to me creating an artwork called Economy of My Body, which I will send later in the chat. And the work was basically collecting all of Google's data that was being done, that I downloaded through my Gmail account, and all of my purchases that were happening and how much actually the economy of maintaining my physical labor in the technological age consumes. So here I tried my best to really visibilize the research that I was doing at the time. So through Google search, everyone can go and see my results, my purchases, how much I have been spending, and this relationship of the search history and like Google's algorithm and how much it's actually affecting my purchases power, and eventually my personalized ad that Google has defined me as. And also it was interesting because I do not necessarily relate to all of those categorization, but because the machine still works within binaries, it was hard to really identify me as something other than male, for example, or that my language is English while it is not. So also there was a lot of that. So in conclusion, at least in my research, I tried my best to really visibilize how my research was being done through this web navigation platform that I created and the website, and how like the performativity of consent that is presented on the web, and through the post-biological, how we cannot really remove computer science from biology, how we cannot really remove identity, sexuality, politics, machine learning, biopower, and everything is entangled and very related to one another. So this is what I really tried to bring into the narrative and like to expose. And at least this is it for now. The project is still going to be ongoing for a year because I do need to collect more data, and I am trying my best to show how through affect and emotions we can really create systems that are less oppressive and that do recognize so many different identities. And with that, I will conclude. Thank you. I'm sorry about the technical issue, but I hope you were able to follow still.
Yeah, thank you very much. And we have a message from our conference lead, Rasa. Please ask direct questions, we would like to hear your voice. And while you are thinking about questions, first of all, Riyadh, I personally was not scared about one slide only because your talk was amazing, and I presume it is a conceptual approach. You will
be very interdisciplinary.
Yeah, like you were able without images to create some impact, at least to me. And one another thing, it is amazing, in my opinion, your personal autoethnography. However, do you have any team behind you? And maybe what would you answer, for example, imagine to Google when you claim these heroes, your words, and Google just took it? What would you answer? Yeah, two questions in one.
I mean, the aim of the project is really to showcase that actually we can access Google's data, and it's actually easy to really like download it. But it's mostly really because there are projects happening and there are many people working on making algorithm better and non-biased, but the funds are not actually being given to those people, but it is being given mostly to white heterosexual cis men who are behind this machines. And then we can really like how Sophia Noble actually discusses a lot in Algorithm of Oppression and in her book, that there are real people making those decisions, and if the money is actually going towards them and they are not implementing systems where they are trying to change them, then we are relatively trapped into the system, and everyone who is even trying to create anything outside of it is still in conversation with them and with this model that is being presented, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Dear audience, your questions about so topical thing, we all involved in this. No, if no any questions, then thank you, Riyadh. And our last speaker or group of speakers will be Alla Semenovskaya. And Alla is an interdisciplinary researcher and consultant based in Russia with a background in strategic business development and launching emerging technologies. Her recent work has specialized in research project and site-specific collaborative practices, exploring comparative governance, climate policies, and implication of computational technologies. Alla's co-authors, Eva Lindsay and Dhruv Shah, also known as Lodeya, both share a common background in architecture. In addition, all project members were involved in the design research program as a terraforming at Strelka Institute for Media, Architecture and Design in Moscow, Russia. And now, Alla and maybe your co-authors, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the intro. It's a pleasure to be here and hear this others' presentations and talks. I think even Dhruv will share the screen and tell a bit more about the project. We've been working collaboratively so far, and I just wanted to say hi and thank you.
Hello, thank you everyone for the amazing talks today. It's been really interesting. Yeah, and as we've already been introduced, we of course met at the Strelka terraforming program, which is based in Moscow, and you should definitely check out the other projects because there's a lot of interesting work there at the moment. And I think Dhruv can share the screen perhaps for the project. Yeah, we can just give a bit of background here. So our project is called Microplot, and it's part of the Strelka overarching theme of this year, which was about planetary scale design in the context of climate breakdown. So we look specifically at the micro scale and the microbiome, and start in the context of the pandemic, which we're all familiar with. And we look at the kind of entangled relationships between microbiomes, environments, and ourselves, and where the role of technology can be adopted in addressing some of these questions. So we study specifically the advancement and the accessibility of genomic sequencing, and we've created a short film or a visual essay which explains a bit more about our work here. Thanks.
Can you all see the screen?
Yes, perfectly.
Drew, I think there is no sound.
Sorry, I'll share my screen again. Is it audible now?
Yes, now sound is.
The first human cases of COVID-19 were reported by officials in Wuhan in December 2019. 19 months later, the virus has colonized vast territories of the planet, with over 190 million human cases and counting. New global alliances, a kind of reverse globalization, and the crumbling of established economic cycles are just some of the pandemic's disruptive effects. At the centre of this planetary scale glitch, not the human, but the microbe. We recognise the contagious respiratory disease only through the symptoms it left behind. First in our bodies, and later through the statistics, maps, and histograms that dominate our news feeds. From the start, collective practices of social distancing, hyper-sterilisation, and universal lockdown were just some of the violent and not always effective techniques of eradication and control, spawned by our low-resolution understanding of the microbial level of pandemic activity. Over time, the pandemic has taught us that in order to act big, we must think small. Our microbial environments critically inform and are informed by how we construct our social, cultural, and technological realities. If at first the reaction to the outbreak was blatant and reactive, viral presence or absence was replaced by a concern for the load, density, and duration of contact. New signals are offering a more granular vision of what a proper transcalar pandemic response might be. For example, the Centre for Disease Control and Prevention in the US initiated the National Wastewater Surveillance System in response to the pandemic. Monitoring wastewater through metagenomic sequencing revealed the presence of the virus, informing more precise plans of counteraction to contain large-scale community infections. Sanitation tracking, viral variant sequencing, simulation modelling, and evolving sanitation protocols through a better understanding of contagion all act as very early signs of sequencing as a potential tool for a more accurate response. Advances in sequencing and the following shift in our culture of design may be the breakthrough that enables a new kind of nuanced, adaptive, and proactive approach to deliberate microbial management, triggering a terraforming effect. The drive for complete microbial eradication is not new. Microbes have a kind of hyperactivity of movement and mutation that enables wide dispersal and rapid adaptation. They never operate in isolation. Mountains, glaciers, and currents have always served as natural channels and borders of microbial movement. But with the first human mass migration and the advent of trade came the dismantling of natural boundaries and the cultivation of synthesized corridors. Routes like the Silk Road accelerated the spread of culture, ideas, goods, and also contagion. the human as the main vector for all of the above. Trade networks were, in effect, microbial networks. It wasn't long before these planetary webs of transmission were observed by the naked eye. The Republic of Venice first broadly implemented the spatial politics of quarantine in the 15th century as a response to the linking of the Black Death to the arrivals and departures at the port, the nodal hub in Central Europe. Our recognition of microbiomes exists only by proxy, with tools and technologies constructing our perception. At first, all we could observe were symptoms. Over time, more precise tools have improved resolution, allowing us to zoom in and understand microbial interactions and the traces they leave behind. A fundamental change in making sense of the invisible was the invention of the microscope in the 17th century. With enhanced sight, the microscope introduced an empirical kind of truth to disease transmission that triggered the shift from miasma to germ theory, framing previously unknown microorganisms for the pathogenic spread of most diseases. If at first innovation was about microbial understanding, fast followed the wave of microbial control through eradication. The 20th century marked the start of a culture of cleanliness in which we designed determinedly and explicitly against microbes. At its peak, the late 19th century hygienist movement pushed the design of extreme sterilized environments, highly tempered and sealed volumes that attempted to secure the human from its non-human adversaries. But even if these extreme design proposals didn't enter the mainstream architectural vernacular, the hygienist movement effectively pushed the cultural needle towards containment at any cost. Sterilization evolved as a fact of life in all corners of our everyday lives. City planning, modernist architecture, FDA food standards, the production of chemicals and cleaning products, and different scales of sealing are the heritage of a kind of microbial paranoia. The hygienist movement framed all microbes as pathogens, something to be eradicated at all costs. This kicked off the culture of cleanliness movement, where hyper-eradication and containment were forefronted in the design process. In the middle of the 20th century, the X-ray diffraction image of crystallized DNA and the blue marble image reframed the position of the human, complicating, if not entirely decentering our role, from micro to macro. The turn of the 21st century witnessed the sequencing of the human genome. The project took almost 13 years and $2.7 billion. Now being utilised exponentially, the time and cost have shortened to less than a day and $1,000, shattering the proposed arc of Moore's Law. Both photography and DNA sequencing altered the way we perceive and act back on environments. From aerial photographs to terrestrial modelling media, the arc of imaging has evolved from a tool of observation to an agent of design. In comparison to imaging, we are at an early stage in the longer arc of sequencing. We are at the cusp of a shift in design culture, informed by a recalibration of understanding and decision-making. Sequencing, sensing, and modelling have revealed that the most dominant relationships we share with the microbiome are non-pathogenic, which demands a new kind of framing of our entanglements. Genomic technologies are already being employed as a tool of observation and mapping, informing how we synthesize our immediate landscapes. One of the examples is the MetaSub Consortium, which is actively working on the cyclic monitoring of microbial signatures in transportation systems. They gather information by sampling the most transient and dense interaction spaces for a more informed meta-design of the urban biomes. Such endeavours of preemptive microbial mapping and monitoring, which are still at an experimental stage, are signs of an inevitable move beyond eradication. Simply put, sequencing allows a higher resolution approach to design, manifesting deliberate microbial synthesis. Potential trajectories of intervention plots could go in three directions: containment, conservation, and composition of the microbiome. The potential threat of disease has triggered the production of highly tempered environments, which target explicitly the containment of all possible pathogens. The capacity to gain a more granular understanding of what we can contain and how allows us to design accordingly. From the Lunar Receiving Lab of the 60s to the potential return of the Mars rover in 2030, NASA has quarantined astronauts and tested samples to mitigate the threat of interplanetary infection. On a more local scale, plant disease centres such as Earth Heart Lab are researching plant contagions which, in the case of escaping, will have a disastrous effect on the world's food supply. Specifications of spatial and atmospheric design run as detailed as the unilateral movement of airflow, individuals, and materials. Such examples of design for containment highlight our preparedness towards the pathogenic microbe. Moving beyond containment, our evolving understanding of the microbiome informs us how critical microbial diversities are. The altering of landscapes has had a significant impact on ecosystems, reducing the multiplicity of plant and animal life at the base of organic webs. As sequencing environmental DNA becomes more widely adopted in conservation biology, it can aid efforts to stop mass extinctions and population declines. Decentralising sequencing technologies like the Oxford Nanopore allows for mapping diverse and remote environments. Evolving genome-scale data is used to identify hotspots to prioritise for preservation, gain a better understanding of the genetic makeup of entire microbial communities, and enrich ecosystem modelling. Sequencing technologies are a key tool to inform policies that attempt to mitigate threats to endangered species. Microbial life is the lowest denominator in both the production and decomposition cycles between the organic and inorganic rounds of energy and material flows. With increased resolution, we can move to the stage of composing our immediate microbial environments in a more deliberate way. Food and soil are domains where sequencing has been most intensely coupled with remote sensing to modify existing production systems. Microbial inoculation is used to increase drought resistance. Soil has been sequenced to measure nutrient and microbial composition and remotely monitored in real time. Whilst agriculture exceeds its limitations, it remains a major cause of climate breakdown, which replace complex wild ecosystems with simplified human food chains. Whilst debates over plant versus meat-based diets dominate the discourse, technologies of genomics and synthetic biology will soon make them irrelevant. Before long, most of our food will come neither from animals nor plants, but from unicellular life. This means multiplying particular microorganisms to produce precise products. On the frontier of this shift right now are companies like Solar Food, Air Protein, and Deep Branch. Brewing microbes through precision fermentation makes it possible to produce nutrition, replacing all farming except fruit and veg production. Precision fermentation will reclaim vast areas of land and sea, massively reducing the use of pesticides and fertilizer. For the last 30 years, attempts have been made to engineer and design by altering and enriching microbiomes as agents for bioremediation of chemical pollution. New tools of molecular engineering and metagenomics help explore solutions to fight toxicity in the most unenvironmental of environments. In the BK Bioreactor Gowanus Canal project in Brooklyn, sequencing is used to map the toxic repercussions of 150 years of industrial pollution. Combined sewage overflow showed new microbial communities unique to the urban realm. If we consider the wider applications of bioremediation with the global environmental microbiome at its core, the potential decentralization and massive global metagenomic scale-up, we can push further the synthetic and better calibrated development of integrative metabolic models. This will, in turn, accelerate the timeline of degrading processes to match microbial and human processes. The closer we zoom in, the clearer the interconnections between the micro and the macro. From this focused perspective, strict differentiation of scales of design and their effects proves insufficient. Facing human-engineered ecological disasters will require a more curated and informed response. This challenge demands major environmental interventions through the reframed and granular actions of design and decision-making. Sites of containment, conservation, and composition highlight a trajectory that reframes our interaction with the microbiome, plotting a transition from blunt, reactive eradication to dynamic, proactive calibration at planetary scale. Here, at the tipping point of the sequencing revolution, hyper-sterilization, purity, and the contemporary drive for cleanliness make way for an editorial approach to composing microbial diversity. Microbioengineering discloses a new era for design, connecting different scales of intervention and effect. Plot is a story of the revelation and a site of design. Through this plot of sequencing, an awareness of new opportunities for tailored approaches emerges, developing our capacities to monitor and act upon the world in the pursuit of viable planetarity. Calibrating microbial composition can alter several domains at various scales, impacting world economies, food security, and healthcare. If implemented at scale, sequencing can become a new tool for an increasingly precise mode of design that may lead to deliberate microbial terraforming.
Thank you very much for watching, and we are happy to answer to any of questions if you have any.
Yeah, again, message from our conference lead, Rasa, to audience. Please ask questions. Please be active. All three presenters are here. You have even a choice to whom asks a question. Oh yeah,
Is it okay? Yeah,
please.
hi.
Kate.
So yeah, thank you. Hi, thank you for showing us the video. It was really beautiful and interesting. And I'm sorry if this is like a somewhat random question, but I was very curious about the point clouds in the presentation, and I was wondering if you could talk about them a little bit more. They worked really well aesthetically, and I was wondering what they were.
I can answer that. Thank you for the question. Yes, we were deliberating about that quite a lot during the modes of representation as well, because we were looking at some sort of granularity to the presentation itself as well. And the notion and the idea or the conception of the project was around the micro scale, and was trying to understand that granularity and how that granularity in a way connects with the planetary as well. So the whole positioning of using the LIDAR scans and the point clouds was more around that, to understand how like that minute grain comes together to produce these larger scale impact as well. And in a way positioning different scales at the same time, where if you really zoom in, you don't really understand the picture, but then sometimes when you zoom out, things get a little clearer as well. So it was connected to the idea of the microscopic and exploring that at a larger scale as well. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. No, any more questions to this, I think, simply amazing video or comments? If really no questions, then we are finishing just in time. And with this, I would like to conclude our session. And of course, thank you all team, our last very convincing team. And now we can leave our breakout room and join the main session and all amazing events which are waiting for us this evening and night. And with this, I would like to say thank you all, and we can leave our breakout room.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.